Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on what part of the earth you're calling in from. My name is Tony Sonera, co-founder and team leader for the Refugee and Migrant Education Network. The network was founded in 2018, the end of 2018, with the intent of being a network of cooperation between universities, NGOs, and individuals who have an interest in enhancing and opening doors for more opportunities for refugee education. This program today is one of the continuing opportunities to provide a chance for members of the network and others to talk about issues of concern. Today's topic is on effective partnerships. And I'm going to turn it over to my dear friend and colleague, Arnaud Martins from Jesuit Refugee Service. He is the Director of Programs and Innovation. He'll take us forward from here.
Thank you, Tony. That's very kind of you. I'm very pleased indeed to be here and do this second webinar with the Refugees and Migrants Education Network after the one we did, I think 5 months ago in the middle of June. And today, as you said, we'll be talking about effective partnerships. And I have the pleasure to do that together with 3 dear colleagues and friends working at JRS and at the GHR Foundation in Minneapolis. I don't know if we can get everybody on the screen already or not, but the panelists for this session are Carrie Medak, who is the manager of the global portfolio of programs at the GHR Foundation. Hi, Carrie. And her colleague Mary Dalsin, who is a program manager at GHR Foundation. Both of them have been with GHR for quite some time, and we have had great collaborations with them. And then last but not least, Danielle Vella, my close colleague, who is managing our reconciliation portfolio at the Jesuit Refugee Service. So Danielle is based in Malta. We will be talking about partnerships, and why is that? I mean, on the one hand, lots is happening in this area, as I hope we will be able to convey to you this morning, this afternoon, depending on where you are. And also, while discussing with Tony and the RMEN network, we thought that the topic complements actually quite well what we have discussed during the previous webinar. So for those of you who were there, will remember, just for the others, very briefly, we had a session on implementing organizations like the Jesuit Refugee Service and how we as organizations adapt to the needs of our times and innovate. And we had a long conversation with our international director, HR director, and one of our regional directors about how the let's say the unfortunately radically changed situation of forcibly displacement in the world really forces us to approach things differently, and how we as an organization are in this process of change management, organizational strengthening, making sure that the organization doesn't become too heavy, that we react timely, that we dedicate sufficient time to our staff, because it's through people that we actually manage to do our work. So there was quite a bit on staff care and all these aspects. So, but the main focus was overall on it was an insight into how an organization works. And I think the session of today complements that really well by also looking at external stakeholders, so also the external audience, also because I mean, first and foremost, the challenges that we are all facing are way too big for one institution to deal with. So this has to be done in collaboration with others. We're very proud our strategic framework. So I will put that in the chat, also because I will kind of very briefly refer to it, and you will see there, and those who know GRS know that we are working in 4 main programmatic areas. We work in education and livelihoods. We work in mental health and psychosocial support. We work in advocacy, and we work in reconciliation. Now, the audience are from the Refugees and Migrants Education Network. Yet we chose to work on reconciliation as a topic for partnership, not because we're not having effective partnerships in education. We actually do have some really strong ones, but our partnership with GHR is a particularly effective one, a particularly innovative one. And I think it's one of the partnerships where let's say both sides are most articulate about what partnership really means, as I hope will become clear. And then also I think the methodology of the partnership, the way we go about it, the strengths, the weaknesses, the possibilities, and the limits, I think that's something that's applicable also to all the other programmatic areas. So we hope that your network finds that useful. And then also within that, you will see we dedicate a bit of time also to the academic collaborations that we have within the area of reconciliation, which again is something that will interest you. Now, overall, like with all the sessions of that Tony has been organizing, this wants to be a session that's useful to the audience. So, of course, we have 2 rounds of questions with the panel, and that will take up about half of the time that we have at our disposal. And then we will open up the floor, and then, of course, please ask any questions you may have about partnerships. As I said, there's a lot happening in terms of partnerships, which is also why, if you look at the strategic framework, we have our organizational strengthening priorities, and one of them is actually called relationships, partnerships, and relationships. And the way we phrase it there is it means for us strong international and local partnerships, close internal collaboration, an engaged community of supporters, and a fruitful relationship with the Society of Jesus, because of course we are a Jesuit organization. And I think that's within this context that our collaboration with GHR also can be seen. And the fact that we put relationships and partnerships so prominently in our strategic framework of these 5 years is that we really want to do more of that with that. So we see the potential, and it is actually also necessary for us, as given the challenges of our times. If you look at our context, working on stronger partnerships is the only way that we see to kind of implement and make realistic what we call here in terms of context, where we say the legal, practical, and spiritual frameworks of our work are provided by the Geneva Refugee Convention, the UN Guiding Principles on Internal Displacement, the Global Compacts on Migrants and Refugees, very important documents, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals, and then encyclical documents like Fratelli Tutti and the social teaching of the social teachings of the Church, together with documents of the Society of Jesus. So we are increasingly developing partnerships in all these different areas. So we have a close collaboration with the Holy See. We work closely together with the UN and the humanitarian community. And just to give you a couple of examples, we have experts in our organization who are working in the education and emergencies networks with other implementing organizations. We are part of the UN Interagency Standing Committee on Mental Health and Psychosocial Support. We have strong collaborations with academic institutions worldwide. We have become a member of something that's called the Core Humanitarian Standards Alliance, something that was created a few years ago by implementing organizations and funders. So there's a lot of movement in this area, and foundations they are an important piece there, which then leads me to the first question, which I'm gonna ask Gary. So just like implementing organizations are rapidly changing and focusing a lot on strategy and partnerships, that's also the case for foundations. Foundations it's a fascinating world. In the US, there's about 100,000 or even more foundations who exist to support good work. In Europe, there's about the same size, over 100,000. It's a market, if I'm not mistaken, that's also really growing. New foundations are being created. Of course, there's a lot of variety, because we immediately think about the really global foundations, big foundations, Open Society, Bill Gates foundations, and then there's much smaller ones, with GHR probably being somewhere in between. But what the sector altogether has in common is that it's moving away from a more charitable model to an impact-oriented model. Foundations have been around for decades, seen what's happening, and so they are increasingly working with let's say, they hire experts, and so people who know what they're doing, have clear strategies of their own, and so on. And we thought GHR is a perfect example of that. So Gary, here's my first question. The GHR Foundation is, has been around for I think over 5 decades, created as a family foundation. You were not around then, but you have been with the foundation for over 10 years. So you have experienced a strong internal transition. So if you could say a bit more about that, what was that transition? Why did it happen? And where are you in this process?
Yeah, thank you, Arno. Absolutely right. We have gone through a lot of transition, and appreciate the point you're making about transformation in philanthropy as much as there's transformation in global development, and among the organizations doing incredible work out there. We're among that shift. The world is changing rapidly, so are we as individuals and institutions. So thanks for having us here, and happy to share a bit of our story. Our partnership with JRS is a point of pride for the organization, so it's just really a privilege to be here. As you noted, GHR is over 50 years old. We were founded by Gerald and Henrietta Roundhorst. They have deep Catholic roots and deeply inspired by Catholic social teaching, and that really thrives in our DNA as a philanthropy today. And over the past few years, we have gone through a process of reflection, multiple moments of sort of evolution and adapting and sorting out who we are as a philanthropy and how we want to show up. And in that process, we've arrived at a bit of a renewed set of values and purpose for the foundation, and that speaks largely to how we partner. So I'll share now our purpose and our values, and that will flow into some of the ingredients that we see in partnership. GHR exists to be of service. That's really important, that first part, to be of service to people and their limitless potential for good. And our values are largely defined around how we partner. We lead with love. We partner boldly. We navigate and adapt, recognizing things are changing all the time. And we reimagine what's possible. And we bring these values to each partnership. And I think that's a bit of at the heart of why we're told we partner well. I'll start by saying that we have not figured everything out, by no means. We're not the experts in partnership, but we show up because we feel like we've learned a few things, and we're happy to offer that to the group. We too are constantly evolving and learning as we encounter with those we're working with, and so we're always changing. Some of the things that we've come to realize is that in order for impact to be possible, we have to cultivate trust. It's a precursor to any kind of social change that we might be pursuing. So that's really at the root of how we approach our work. So both trust and arriving at shared purpose. As I was thinking about if we had a recipe for partnership, I think there are 4 things that might be ingredients in that recipe, and we've arrived at these over these past few years of as you noted, Arno, a reflection period within the foundation. I think at the heart of these 4 ingredients is what inspires us. So we take time to intentionally think through where our inspiration is drawn from and how that shapes those the way we partner. In our case, the words of Pope Francis, in this moment of multiple global crises, they're growing rather than shrinking. Things are getting worse rather than better, one might say. His words cut through that rancor. And for us, they're really like a balm. They're sort of offering us a path forward, and both spiritual, but also very concrete, sort of see, judge, act, calling out exactly where he's seeing problems, where he's seeing different ways to come together to respond, and calling us to center the poor and vulnerable in our actions as we move forward. So this inspires how we work, who we work with, and what we pursue together. The next ingredient is around our values and our expertise. So we are a private foundation based in Minneapolis, as you noted. It's a very chilly morning here for those in other parts of the world. The foundation has a footprint in 3 different areas. Local, so in our home community, we focus on education and racial equity and what we have to offer the community within which we're rooted. We have a global footprint, which is what I'm representing here today, where we focus largely on Catholic networks for social justice. And then we have a 3rd area, biomedical, which largely focuses on research innovations to cure Alzheimer's. The partnerships there are with researchers and governments, whereas partnerships in global are largely with Catholic institutions. And we draw on our experience across those different areas to help inform our work and to bring everything we can to a partnership to help partners succeed. So in the global area, we largely focus on dignity, solidarity, and subsidiarity. And we have a long history of working with and among faith networks, and that inspires how we partner. For example, we've invested in a decade of work uplifting the value and practice of interreligious action. And Mary has largely been part of that work, and she'll be able to speak to that experience as she talks about JRS. We work with Catholic sisters to help them strengthen families, to reduce the likelihood of children residing in orphanages, knowing they thrive best in families. And we work with the Vatican, building its capacity to carry out Pope Francis's vision for a church in service to the most vulnerable. So it offers you a sense of the depth and breadth of what we see, and we can bring what we see to each partnership to help advance the work. And that leads to the 4th ingredient, and maybe it's the most important one, is conversation. And this is deep listening and dialogue with our partners so that we can best understand how to best be in service to them. So our values and our experience guide that path, but it's the conversation with partners and the realities that they're experiencing where the work really comes to life. And our task is to unleash abundance and potential so that our partners can best serve. We offer financial support, we offer non-financial support, and really arrive at the work in the spirit of accompaniment, designing and adapting based on what's happening in each day. So this just tells you a bit of a story of the ingredients of how we see partnership. We really arrived at a better sense of these things after going through a period of reflection over the past few years with our board and with our staff, and thinking about the competence that we have in the global development space and our credibility of working with faith actors. So we find ourselves pushing in different ways, asking different kinds of questions that maybe other funders don't ask. Who can we connect to this work? How can we bridge it to others doing different things? How might we use our voice to advance the message? But most importantly, what does this partner need to do their best work? And we believe that our work with JRS is a really good example of what that looks like in practice. So I've sort of offered some broad strokes and some general sense of this, but I think my colleagues, Mary and Danielle, will really be able to provide specific, concrete examples of what that looks like. Hopefully that helps give Arno a sense of what you were trying to convey in terms of how the foundation is evolving.
Absolutely. No, thanks for that. And very clear. And I think this you mentioned a couple of topics that we will come back to in the next hour. Mary, you have been with GHR I think about 8 years as program manager, and you have done similar work in other organizations, like starting, if I'm not mistaken, at the University of California and at Davis, and then worked at a public health institution doing similar work. So I also wanted to ask you if you look back and even within GHR, given your role, what has changed and what's different between how you're doing your work now at GHR and kind of in your previous jobs, and then specifically, of course, when it comes to collaboration with partners, because of course our experience is firsthand and so positive about the fact that GHR does not see itself just as the organization writing the check and that's it, but it comes with a lot of other support, which you make sure that kind of arrives at the partner's office. So if you could share kind of how you see that partnership, and then specifically with JRS.
Sure. Thanks for the question, Arno. I'll respond to the question about working at UC Davis and with the Public Health Institute in Oakland. At UC Davis, it was a USAID grant that I worked on for an international project. And at Public Health Institute, we received class action lawsuit funding to put back out into the community to address the wrongs that the class action lawsuit was addressing. And so for both of those, there were very specific outcomes that the organizations wanted. And so we were holding to account the partners that we were giving money to these predetermined outcomes by someone else. So I think that would be my starting point for what's really different at GHR. We don't start with we want this change to happen. How can GRS or JRS fit into our puzzle? We come to the table and are curious. We saw JRS as an organization that was trying to adapt in this new reality of 2015, where there was an explosion of refugees and internally displaced persons and migrants and people on the move. And JRS was saying, we need to respond, we need to adapt, we need to navigate, we need to partner boldly. And so GHR came on board. I'd like to, because we were curious how JRS was going to navigate this space. Before I jump into our specific relationship with JRS, you asked about how GHR approaches partnerships. And so I'm just going to give a little more color to the response that Carrie gave. And I'm going to uplift two things. One is our accompaniment approach, and our second is working as a listening partner. So again, GHR approaches its grant making as a partnership, and we've tried to align our grant making policies and systems to enable us to be both an accompanier and a good listener. So we lift up accompaniment in how we engage with partners. We see ourselves alongside them in a journey, and that journey is on a road that's being built as we're walking it together. And so we realized that our systems and our policies needed to be adaptable and adjustable so that we could respond to your needs. So when you give us a proposal that has specific activities and the specific work that you're trying to do, it's with the understanding that this all makes sense theoretically, but once the project starts and you're walking along that road, come back to us and let us know when things change, when there's an obstacle that you need to adjust to. That also translates to how we do our grant making. Our grant making is not typically these 1, 3, 5 year long grants. It's more along the lines of 10 years. And so it's really, that's part of how we see it as a partnership. We're not here just for the short term. And so then secondly, I would talk about our being a listening partner. So staff is actually given time to be in conversation with our partners. And it's not just making the time, and I'm reflecting back on this, this awareness during COVID that time is a commodity, and we're really trying not to think of time as a commodity. We're trying to prioritize time with partners so that we can be there to listen, to reflect, and learn, because GHR is also on a journey of how do we live out our values. And we really feel that we can understand that better if we're understanding how our partners are implementing the work that we're able to support. And that listening starts at the design phase. It's not just at the end when a final report comes along. We also, our grant making systems are actually designed so that we can capture these moments of connecting with partners, so that when we reconnect with a partner, it's picking up a conversation that's been ongoing. It's not it's not starting at the beginning. It's not remind me where you were, so that it's actually an ongoing conversation, almost again, what we see as a real partnership. So the other part of our system that's very easy is we try to make the amendment process very simple. It's basically an email. We review it. Sometimes it needs to be escalated to leadership for approval, depending on what the change is. But for the most part, we're understanding that you're on a journey. Again, you're on a journey, you're building a road, and we need to be able to adapt to your realities. And so those comments really lead me back to the values that Carrie lifted up: partnering boldly, reimagining what's possible, and navigating and adapting. And I think that's where we found JRS. Again, that's where we found JRS in 2015, when we made our first grant to them. Again, they were trying to navigate and adapt. They were trying to figure out how to partner boldly. And they were trying to reimagine what's possible for their program serving refugees at a time when, again, the number of people on the move was just exploding in our globe. So the first grant to JRS was in the midst of this time, and it was support for them to go through a strategic process and a capacity assessment of the organization. What did they need to respond to this moment? During their strategic review, they also knew that they had to get the buy-in across the organization. It couldn't just be at the strategic leadership team level. They knew they needed to get the regional directors involved. They knew they needed to get the country directors involved. They knew that they needed to get the people implementing the programs on the ground involved and get their feedback. And then they knew their beneficiaries needed to provide feedback as well. And the process took a long time. It took longer than a normal strategic review would take. And in fact, at one point, Father Tom, the international director at the time, said, you know what, we're going to pause, and I want to make sure that everyone's had the time to reflect on where on the point we've gotten to in this strategic review. So he said, take 6 months, make sure that this strategic review is really going to work for you in the realities that you're working. And then when they came back, they felt that they had a stronger document to take forward, and it was going to be a living document, one that JRS could continue to return to and say, how are we responding? How are we living up to the goals and priorities that we've put into this? Our second grant quickly followed that picked up a piece in the strategic review around faith-based reconciliation. And that's where the Interreligious Action Initiative and JRS really found a niche to work on together. Because JRS was realizing that more and more they were working with people that weren't of the same faith, and that they needed to understand what that meant for their staff, what that meant for the people they were serving, and how to come to a common understanding about how the work would proceed. We were actually able to do a reflection on this process with JRS in a 10-year review of our IRA programming. It'll be posted on our website shortly. If you want to read more about JRS's journey through its strategic review and its capacity assessment, and where GHR really found an opportunity to partner together. So I'll turn it back to Arnaud and let Danielle pick up.
Yeah, thank you, Mary, and indeed, I will come back to the strategic review grant, which indeed was the first grant that the foundation made for JRS, which is actually quite exceptional that a partner starts right away that sort of work rather than starting with a programmatic grant. Danielle, you have been with JRS for over 20 years. No, you joined the organization in 99. You've worked in different areas. You worked a lot in communications, various roles, and then also the important work of mission and identity, which then kind of, I think, helped you move into your current position of manager, global manager of our reconciliation work, which started now 4 years ago with this funding from GHR. So you are, let's say, the main relationship manager in GRS and the bridge between the organization, our organization, and GHR. So would you mind kind of explaining how you have been experiencing the collaboration with GHR?
Yes, thanks, Arnaud. So I think in a lot of what I'm going to say, I'm going to be echoing what Mary and Kerry have said, which I think is good news. So before I start about the collaboration, just a word about the faith-based reconciliation approach of JRS, which, I mean, we can say that reconciliation has always been present in the 40 plus years of existence of JRS. But in the past 8 years or so, the organization started a kind of search to make reconciliation. How can we make reconciliation an integral, intentional, and systematic part of our mission as a faith-based organization? And this is where, and this is a journey, as Mary said, it's a journey that continues. And this is the journey that GHR has been accompanying us on. If I have to think of like really what kind of support did GHR offer to the faith-based reconciliation program, and by extension to JRS at large, what really comes to me as really helpful in the collaboration is something that Mary has already mentioned, which is that we could have the time and the space to explore many things in the strategic review, and then specifically how to integrate faith-based reconciliation in everything that we do. And having this time and space was a luxury, if you want, but one that really paid off. And so not only how do we make reconciliation a part of our DNA, and how do we really make it part of our mission, but how do we do it in multi-faith and multicultural environments? How are we going to be inspired by our faith, our Catholic faith, our Jesuit roots? You know, how do we draw on them and at the same time live out this mission and share it and be enriched by the different faiths of the people whom we serve and of our own teams? And there is an understanding, as can be seen from what Mary and Kerry have shared, that we're in this for the long haul. This is not something you do in 2 years and it's done and it's dusted, you know, it takes years. And not only to do the work on the ground, but even to do the work in the organization, you know, to get that organizational transformation which needs buy-in. So this understanding from GHR and their constant accompaniment in the process has been really helpful. I would then say flexibility. The flexibility of GHR as a donor, also mentioned by Mary, has been so key. Because of course you go with a game plan, you present a project proposal which is so neat. 6 months down the line, 1 year down the line, you know, the context, the realities show that it's going to take longer or it's not going to work. And I find that, you know, as long as you're transparent about the challenges that you're facing, they're so open to consider a change in that game plan. And that's so key. I think it's this flexibility which is built on trust. So Kerry has also mentioned trust, and to feel so that of trusted, you know, is something which is really good and encouraging in itself. And the flexibility comes from the trust. Then there is something else which is really helpful, is the expert technical advice, mostly from a programming perspective, how to do. Advice which is not imposed, but it's a conversation, and I think the most useful thing for us in this, there have been many useful suggestions and, as I said, really good technical advice. But something really helpful was in the way we monitor and evaluate what we do, and in the way we learn from what we do and how we can share it. So something that Mary said is, why don't you try adopting a principles-focused approach? So coming up with operational principles to guide and inspire your reconciliation work, and then also to help you to monitor it, evaluate it, and learn from it. And this turned out to be really a master stroke of genius, I think, for us, because it really proved exciting. And it's a journey we're still on. So this is a journey of years, as I said, but it's very exciting to walk along this with always GHR as a critical part of the conversation, and actually having suggested that we do this, and it's something that really paid off. Something else I'd like to mention, one more thing, is networking. The GHR has really helped us in this respect. There are so many organizations out there, doing this work of reconciliation, not so many of reconciliation, but more of peace building, conflict resolution, humanitarian aid and peace building, the nexus, and faith-based. So GHR has a wealth of partners, is really eager to share, and this is also something which is really helpful. So I remember around 5 years ago, I think, GHR invited a participant from JRS, and I went to go to the Global Advisory Council of I always forget the name, so I wrote it down, Effective Interreligious Action in Peace Building Program. And this was so exciting to go. We're just starting to see, okay, how are we going to do this faith-based reconciliation work? And there were so many people from academic backgrounds, from NGOs, different religious and cultural backgrounds, who are all doing this work. And a very practical consequence of that was that we set up an advisory group, which still exists now. Most of the people in that group originally came from this meeting, and this has been an approach, having this community of learning, we call it, inviting others to help us shape the approach that has really enriched what we do in reconciliation. I think the help of the support of GHR, what constantly comes to mind is not doing just to do, not doing just to do, but really take your time, explore, do it well. We trust you and we're with you. And this helps us to reach that cutting edge of humanitarian work that Arnaud was referring to, really exploring the nexus between humanitarian and peace building and reconciliation work, really taking seriously accountability, conflict sensitivity in respect of the principle of do no harm, really capitalizing on the faith-based aspect of our work, which is who we are. So we have been able, I think, to do these things. We're still doing journey where we don't know in the end where we're going, but step by step. It's possible because we have this ongoing conversation, accompaniment, and support. That's what I would say. We accompany refugees and host communities, and we are in turn accompanied. And that, I think, is something which is really positive and how it should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Just a further practical thing for the audience. If you have questions, we will pick them up. So please use the chat for that, and we will read those, of course. Carrie, I wanted to get back to you. I mean, you spoke about a recipe, and I want to ask a question about the kitchen. In the sense that, and it's about the topic of strategy, organizational strengthening, and the boundaries around that. So as Mary has mentioned, the first, let's say, formal let's say interaction between GHR and GRS indeed was a grant to fund what we had then called the strategic review. So it was that came at the end of 2015, and that really allowed GRS to start this journey of organizational strengthening, which Mary has also kind of elegantly described, that we had some bumps on the road and some things took longer, some things went faster and so on. But it really was a journey that, and I think we're seeing in what direction it's going. So we have been navigating, sometimes losing course, but then I think we're seeing which harbor we want to kind of get into. And you as a foundation, you have kept supporting that. And then there's also a piece of this sort of work that you do. And again, it's this nice mix of Foundations 2.0, who provide not just money, but this combination of time, talent, and treasure. And that also you personally, in your role, you provide actually strategic advice to partners, including our big neighbor here in Rome, the Holy See. So my question there is, could you say a bit more about how you interpret your role, and talking about the kitchen, how deep do you need to get into the kitchen, and what's the limits where you say, okay, this is no longer the Foundation's role, this is what the organization needs to do?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. I say that because it's one we wrestle with routinely, and it's when we're still arriving at answers. But you're right that GHR has, in the past couple of years, really started to think a little bit differently about how it engages beyond simply just making grants or writing checks, and recognizing that we have visibility across the landscape that's helpful to partners that maybe other partners can't see, and that we have spent a lot of time helping partners build themselves as an organization. So we've learned some things in that process, and so that sort of becomes our expertise to offer. Where in some cases you may have philanthropies who are expert on climate change or policy change, or our expertise is a bit of a blend of organizational strengthening, different tools and strategies for strengthening an organization, as well as sort of helping an organization think through how to reorient and retool toward its purpose and values. And I think we've developed that competency because we've been doing it ourselves. And so we're sort of able to accompany. And JRS, I think, is one of the partners where we do a lot of this, but there are others, as you noted, with the Holy See, and we also work with CRS and Catholic Sisters and a variety of folks, where we're asking questions about what does the organization need to be strong, because we think that there could be lots of folks out there funding projects, and projects are important, but they're only as effective as the organization is that's delivering the project. And so we focus intensely on organizational strengthening. How deep we go into the kitchen is sort of depends on the partner. If we have value to add, if the partner believes we have value to add to their work beyond the check, we are curious about that conversation and we explore it. And in the case with JRS, there's been a natural connection between what the organization is trying to do and the expertise and learning that we're able to bring. So it's been rather, I think, comfortable and fluid in that way, where we felt like there was a natural partnership there. It's not always the case. Some partners need things we can't offer, and so we don't lean in that way. We do some grant making, maybe we make a connection, but then we say, well, you might need somebody like this kind of set of expertise. We're happy to try to help find that if that's useful to you. So we don't have the same exact relationship with every partner. It depends on the needs. The work with the Holy See, where, for example, we've leaned really heavily into a partnership with the Dicastery for promoting integral human development. And that's largely because we believe in the mission that they're doing. We have experience in global development. We see the value of the church in that space. And we're curious about how we can help them think and retool and reorient towards who they, the mission that they have. It's a very broad mission. So we help them think through their strategic plan, different kinds of skills and competencies they might need on the team, different ways, for example, to bring global South representation, or different ways to think about introducing women and laity into their programs, those kinds of things as an example. We help them with even some basic things, like if they want to convene a meeting of some folks they haven't met with before, how might they think about the agenda and setting the tone of the conversation, those kinds of things. So it spans a wide berth of activities. But again, I think what it boils down to is, if the partner believes we have value to add, we're willing to go there and have that conversation and see how to do that. With Mary, her expertise in monitoring and evaluation and assessment was a natural fit for what JRS was trying to do. So it worked out well that she could spend dedicated time to bring her own background to the conversation. Whereas in my case, it tends to be more on the sort of management and leadership and different tools around communications and those kinds of things. So we make a good team in that respect as we span a range of skills. So hopefully that's helpful. I will say, it's just very briefly, it can be a point of tension for a foundation to sort of see itself as coming in beyond the check. I think it's a real fine line that we have to walk to make sure that we're creating fertile ground for a partner to be strong, but not imposing our own sense of, achieving our means through the strengthening of an organization. So it's a fine line that we have to walk to do that well.
Thank you. And a follow-up question to Mary. But I mean, I was listening to you and of course, and also to what Danielle said, and a lot is about values and alignment, and sharing of tools and journey and conversation. Unfortunately, we haven't experienced that. But my question, I think, is what are, because it's a very new approach to ground making, and yet at the same time there need to be clear deliverables at certain points in order to kind of make the partnership work, and so that it's not just about you cannot be eternally flexible. We as implementing organizations also need to deliver. Is it in this new way of thinking, how do you define what the, how to call it, kind of cornerstones, key moments, kind of pivotal moments are that kind of need to be respected to make the relationship going? And do you have a scenario internally to address issues if they would come up?
Thanks for the question, Arno. Not an easy, no easy questions. So I think, so the reason why we're so interested in working with JRS is we're both values-driven organizations. And, for us, it's that the values are sort of based in Catholic social teaching, in Catholic social teaching. And we're both trying to use guiding principles to help live out those values. And just for everyone, guiding principles are the pull star for every decision and interaction and evaluation. So GHR is really trying to think differently about what is success. And it is because so many people, so many organizations have been working within OECD's DAC criteria and this very Western understanding that you can have a theory of change and then you put together a logic model that tells you exactly how you're going to get to your endpoint. But in reality, we all know that logic models fail, and they're very difficult to hold organizations to because they're so static. And in a world where everything is changing constantly, we needed something different. And so we really said, how we really felt that if an organization can look deeply at its values and what does it mean to live out those values, that's going to make the difference in the type of programs that they can implement and how successful those programs are going to be. But we weren't going to decide what is that success of that program. There also aren't a lot of case studies to point to right now to tell you how to do this work. Principles-based evaluation was really only, it really only came about in 2018, I think, by Michael Quinn Patton with his, he published a book on it and he started, providing trainings, and there's a very small group of evaluators that even understand how to articulate principles, what it means to hold yourself accountable to principles. So I really mean it when I say that JRS and GHR are learning how to do this together. And it's really wonderful to have a thought partner in that. And we were really fortunate that Danielle was traveling in the United States with her book about refugee stories. And she came to Minneapolis and we put her together with the evaluator that we found. And Minneapolis is really fortunate to have this rich group of evaluators. In fact, Michael Quinn Patton is from Minnesota, and the evaluator we got was the first one to do a published article on principles. It was about, see if I can get the title correct, 9 principles for working with youth experiencing homelessness. And her name's Nora Murphy-Johnson. And I'm going to put in the chat a link to our Bridge Builder work, in which we worked with Nora and Inspire to Change. And there's a case study in there in case you want to look further. But so when Danielle and I started, when I received the proposal from Danielle for the first faith-based reconciliation project, we started to have a conversation about how did she want to understand and evaluate the project. And she really went, I mean, like we all do, we were falling back on the DAC criteria. And, I was just fortunate enough to be able to say, is this fitting? Is this working for you? Do you think this is going to be, get you what you're hoping to find out for JRS? And that's when we had this conversation about this new type of evaluation called principles-based evaluation. And it was really nice that Danielle was so well open to it. And she was curious and she wanted to learn more. And so again, we went on this journey together. So I think I'll pause there and I'll put the document in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. Danielle, could you follow up on this in the sense that we indeed started with let's say a more traditional programmatic approach to the reconciliation program that we wanted to implement, and then GHR came with their principles. Could you share how that has influenced the work of JRS for your area specifically, and then even beyond?
Yes, thank you. So yes, when we were seeing how are we going to monitor and evaluate what we do and learn from it, and even at that point, as the project proposal was being written, Mary, I remember, was asking very searching questions about that and picking out sentences in the proposal and saying, this is an evaluation statement. How are you going to do that? So, oops, okay. But it was good because it forced us really to think, and we couldn't just fall back on the usual, logic model. But also, and this is one place where kind of doing reconciliation work in a traditionally humanitarian organization made us see that we needed different ways to monitor and evaluate what we do in reconciliation, and look much more for emergent outcomes, and make room for situations where you don't know. I mean, you can have hoped for outcomes in mind, but you have to be prepared for anything, because we're talking about relational dynamics and internal change, and how do you measure those, and how do you know. So the principles focused approach, when suggested by Mary, I started reading up, and really quickly I got hooked, because it's really a fit, So from then to now, and I think it's been now around, wait a minute, nearly 4 years, I think, right? So it's only now after, so we first said, okay, what are our principles going to be? You know, so we had to mine for them and find them and go through a whole process throughout the organization to validate them, to see if the organization is really going to own them from a reconciliation perspective. Then how do we communicate them? How do we see that, you know, they can be lived? How do we, so it's been a really long journey. We've been working for now 1.5 years with, so Nora, the consultant mentioned by Mary, joined us for the last 1.5 years of this journey. And that was really helpful to really flesh out what every principle looks like. So we have 5 operational principles, guiding principles, and they really cover all the things that are key to us as an organization, our mission, our strategic framework. They touch upon, of course, our vision of recreating right relationships, equitable participation, justice that restores, not further breaks down relationships, accompanying from an interfaith perspective on journeys of reconciliation, and really prioritizing the value of the humanity we share. We are one human family above differences that are in the end socially ascribed. So having these principles, seeing them take shape, seeing how now we've come to the exciting step, okay, we have principles, we have a system even to monitor and evaluate them. How do we get more organizational buy-in to really make these principles really to guide the decisions every day that are taken by the organization? So it takes time. And again, as Mary said, it's a journey that we're going on. But having the conversation with GHR, with Nora, within JRS is, I think, a very exciting, scary, but exciting process at the same time.
Thanks, Danielle. Before opening over the floor to the audience, given that many of the participants here come from academic backgrounds, would you mind just saying briefly about how within the reconciliation work that we're doing in partnership with GHR, the different academic components come in?
Yes, so I think that academic institutions are another very important strategic partner for us. I think what I would say is that it takes time. It takes a lot of time to work with academic partners. So, because it's about relationships at the end of the day and trust. So a lot of time is taken to build the relationship with a given academic institution, to see what expectations are and to find a balance between those expectations. But it's a very essential, I think, partnership. And we're looking forward to building more. Of course, Jesuit institutions, academic institutions are a natural partner for us. And we have a strong partnership with the School for Theology and Ministry of Boston College. And then we also have with some non-Jesuit institutions, particularly at the moment, the Center for Reconciliation, Religion and Peace of the University of Winchester in the UK. Very briefly, where do we see that academic institutions can add value to our work? Okay, so I would say, first of all, in 2 main areas, okay, and the first area would be the research area. I think that, not only I think, I mean, it's out there, faith-based organizations do so many things so well, but can be notoriously bad in reporting what they do, in gathering evidence for what they do, in recording it, and in disseminating it. So this is where research can help us play a role, first of all, in really investigating the impact of our own work. We do a lot of capacity building, for example, of our teams, refugee and host communities as well. Is that capacity building really having the impact we want it to have? That's one research question we want to look at. What does real capacity building, good capacity building for facilitating reconciliation processes look like in such contexts? And then research, we're doing a lot of work of research, in reconciliation on the ground. We believe we have something to share from that, something to share, especially with the world, because I think what we do is really, what we try to do is a direct reflection of the message and vision of Pope Francis, for reconciliation, especially as enshrined in Laudate Si and Fratelli Tutti. So how can we share what we're doing, so evidence-based research, and how this, and by extension, the vision of Pope Francis can make a real difference and a contribution to the debate, often very polarized and sterile, on refugees and on irregular immigration. So there is that. Academic institutions can really help us here, the research component, and the other component where academic institutions can really help is, and I see this as directly part of the organizational strengthening, is to help us build the capacity of our staff. First of all, in helping us to come out with capacity building resources. So something that Boston College has done, for example, is they have done 2 modules for us so far, one on rebuilding relationships in troubled contexts, and now we're working on one with them on resilience. And pre-COVID, they even sent a team of their faculty to do this workshop on site. So it can be really exciting for both sides and really fruitful. And the other way is a big problem that we always have is turnover of staff in humanitarian NGOs. This is a given. So ways not only to build staff capacity, but to retain staff as well. Like maybe, for example, having a certificate course which keeps them there and is a carrot for them to stay longer while building their capacity. These are some of the issues we're looking into. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. There's a couple of questions that we know from the audience, and the first, Drew Edwards from Pangea. Please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for such just engaging conversation from so many different sort of perspectives here. My question, it's hard because we're speaking about so many different ways of partnering, but my question, especially when we're talking about sort of the foundation relationships with communities, with so many different actors and sort of power dynamics that exist, I guess one of the questions I have are just if anyone could share what you've been learning about initiating partnerships. I feel like the auspices under which we launch these things, and funders are often the ones that are directing the power dynamic in many ways. And organizations like myself that provide opportunities for communities to partner with us and engage with us. It's just so often that we're directing the conversation to meet towards those logic framework ends. I guess I'm just wondering how you level those playing fields to make sure that they're truly meeting sort of participant and community needs.
Harry, this is maybe a question for you.
Yeah, it's a hard question because it does cover a lot of different areas. But a few reactions. One, I think a challenge for a foundation is that we can't partner with everybody. We're sort of, we're all limited by a number of constraints about what we can do. And so that's always a challenge for us. I think another question foundations are wrestling with is how to ensure they are inclusive in who they're thinking about engaging with. For GHR, we have drawn some boundaries. So we, in this area of work, are largely looking at the Catholic universe and find that we initiate partnerships based on the depth and breadth and reach that a particular partner has. So because we want to try to think about how to amplify or have ripple effects of whatever investment we make, we tend to look at partners that are working either at a regional or a global level in a network fashion, because they're in essence reaching all different parts of the globe. And if they're strong, then all the work they do around the globe becomes stronger. But that's not enough. It has to also be within a values base that prioritizes a certain number of things like subsidiarity, local leadership, et cetera. So it's working at a global level to have local impact. So I guess what I'm suggesting is that initiating partnerships for us really rests within a values conversation where there's alignment and this ability to have depth and breadth of reach. And we tend to sort of just You know, if we have a conversation with an existing partner, we'd say, who else do you think we should be talking to? And that usually gives us 3 or 4 different names. And then we talk to those folks. And who else do you, and in that process, we're not only prospecting where we see alignment between our values and others and what we're trying to achieve, but also getting a handle on the landscape. So it helps us to try to understand who's doing what and where are there areas of momentum. So I don't know if that 100% gets at your question, but it offers at least just a sense of the inner workings, the kitchen, if you will, of how GHR thinks about some of those questions and initiating partnership. And of course, Mary, Danielle, anything you might want to add to that?
Thank you,
Yeah,
Carrie.
thanks, Carrie. If I can, Arnaud, I think one thing that it's always interesting because we sit at a foundation, what conversations we get to be in. And so we talk to a lot of foundations. We're part of funders groups in peace and security, in early childhood, we haven't been as active with the refugee and migrant network, but funders are talking about this. And they are trying to figure out, how do we not be prescriptive? And how do we, because of COVID, you know, we've all come to a reckoning, and because of the murder of George Floyd. So foundations are thinking about this, and their staff are thinking about this. So I know there's definitely a power dynamic. And so how do you enter into those conversations? But foundations are putting, like, directors and executive directors are putting statements out in blogs, in annual reports, that I would encourage you to try to pick up on those threads and ask them, how are they living out these new approaches to grant making that their leadership is talking about.
Well, thank you, Mary and Carrie. Thank you. Susan Daly has a question now, I think.
Hi, thank you for all this helpful information today. My question is about an organization that I'm, can you hear me? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested in starting an organization that supports immigrant advocates, advocates who are trying to reach immigrants throughout the United States to represent and serve them. And so my question is, for a brand new organization that's trying to get started, would you recommend reaching out to a partner to help with designing and implementing a strategy?
Mary or Carrie?
I'm off mute. I'm happy to start. And then again, Mary, please jump in. I think one of the reactions I have is, one of the questions a foundation will ask often when we're entering a partnership is, who else does what you do, and how are you adding or unique to that? So sort of trying to understand the niche of an organization, and then understanding its strategy. So some of what you're describing in terms of isolating the work you're going to do, the value it adds to an existing landscape of actors, and sort of knowing who's doing what, I think is an important step. Partnering with some others to understand the landscape so that you have a sense of who all the actors are is helpful. Understanding where you can work collaboratively rather than in isolation is part of that process. But I do think it's helpful to start to convene a couple of different folks in the ecosystem, either doing what you're going to do or benefiting from what you're going to do, and understand how they can help you shape the service that you're offering. And then that in turn helps you understand how to bring along a donor in that conversation to be as clear and specific as you can about the gap that you're filling and the unique value add you have to bring. Mm-hmm. One of the things we tend to see is often the question of collaboration or merger comes up because there's lots of different actors trying to do the same thing, yet they don't know each other. And so we often try to look for opportunities to knit those things together where it makes sense for the partners. So that's one reaction to your question.
Mm-hmm.
Mary, would you like to add anything?
No, I agree with Carrie. It's always interesting. Someone has a great idea, but someone in this next state over also has that same great idea. It's always interesting who's talking to who, and just try to get yourself into different spaces to learn from others.
And Susan, I'm not sure if you're aware, if you are, great, there's an affinity group for funders around immigrants and refugees in the US, and learning more about what they're talking about and who they know, I think is a good resource as well. They have a pretty good website. I'm happy to share offline if it's helpful to you.
Yeah.
Feel free to reach out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then I think we have Anna Daly.
Yes, so my question is kind of geared towards the NGOs who are in our audience. And when a foundation is looking at an NGO to form a partnership, you mentioned the importance of coming with a strategic framework. But what are the features of that strategy that you look for that are most important? And also, how can you build that in a way that is flexible and is prepared for the uncertainty of the future, as we spoke about?
Yeah, I'm happy to offer just a sort of a general response, and then I think there are a couple of specifics maybe Mary could offer, because I think we look at strategy at two levels, sort of the practical concrete components of what an organization needs to run well. It's leadership, it's finances, it's communications, sort of the general aspects of what an organization needs to thrive. And there are a set of tools that we think about as we try to assess that. But then there are specific things that might be looked for around the strategy that are programmatic. In the case of JRS and reconciliation, there's a certain set of things that feel really important to be successful in that endeavor. And that's a bit of where Mary's work has come in the partnership with JRS in terms of how to build in those tools around reconciliation, a specific practice. So if we're thinking about a strategic framework with a partner, typically what we'll ask, what do you already have, and not expect one way or another that it's the best of all or just the beginnings. It's more trying to understand where a partner is in their journey around their organizational model, where they see gaps, where they see opportunities, and then a conversation about how to fill those. And a strategic framework simply becomes a tool to advance the dialogue, the conversation. It doesn't necessarily need to be the end all be all of all of the things that are needed, but it's a way to have a conversation. So that's typically how we engage in a conversation around strategic framework. I get a little antsy when there's lots of strategy thrown around because it's so much more than that. As we've been talking about, what are all the things upstream around values and purpose? And that's where I think not enough time is spent, and we spend a lot of time on strategy, A to B to C, but it's the upstream stuff that's really important. Do you have a strong financial model? Do you have a sense of how your leadership might evolve over the next 5 years? Do you have a succession plan? How are you training and retaining your team? Those kinds of things. So hopefully that gives you a sense of what we would look for as we're engaging in conversation. I don't know if others want to add to that.
So I was thinking from our, let's say, at the receiving end, as an implementing organization in terms of partnership. Receiving end is probably not the appropriate concept, but in any case, for an implementing organization, in order to make a partnership work, our experience is that it really needs to fit within our strategic priorities, within our strategic framework. Because otherwise, sometimes we get offered really great support from organizations. It could be foundations, could be academic institutions, could be pro bono consultants. And our experience is that if it's not really fitting our priorities, we don't manage either to give it the appropriate attention or not really absorb the offer. So in that sense, I think it's again, it's a mutual conversation. And as you say, Ekam, it helps frame the dialogue and explore possibilities. Good. Tony, I think you have a question, right?
Yes, thank you. Actually, given how the conversation has evolved, more a comment than a question, perhaps a question too. I really have appreciated the focus and emphasis on the upstream positions and issues that need to be addressed, because I think you really put your finger on what I have seen in my years of being involved, both as a university president and now with the Refugee and Migrant Education Network, is people are often on the front line of issues and are facing, here's the day-to-day reality that we're trying to confront. But that, so the back end, the upstream issues tend not to get attended to. So I really have appreciated the emphasis that you all have made on the importance of that. And certainly in this last year of partnership and colleagueship with JRS, JRS has been involved with the development of the Refugee and Migrant Education Network from the very beginning. This emphasis on the upstream issues has been one of the most impressive things that I've seen there. But for new organizations or small organizations that are attempting to establish themselves, how do you help them to take that step back? And that may be as much a question for you as from the other colleagues in the conversation. You made a point about Father Tom saying, let's make sure let's take a step back and reflect on where we are in this process. How do you help smaller and also perhaps newer organizations do that when they're immersed in the immediacy of their work?
I think that's where, thanks for the question, Tony. I think that's where or at least for GHR, that's where the listening part comes in. If we're in conversation with our partners, we're going to hear that and we're going to be able to ask, it sounds like. So unfortunately, it's not a, sort of a universal, how does this work? That's how it works for GHR is we'll tend to hear the urgency and we'll ask, it sounds like I'm hearing you're feeling the urgency to do it right now. What happens if you take 4 months, 6 months? How much time do you need to, and what resources do you need? But I feel like that's a very specific approach that GHR takes. I don't get to hear that a lot of foundations are doing that.
Right.
I'm not saying they aren't. I just don't know that they are. But at least for, and again, like our systems are so amenable to changes. I feel like that additional time that Father Tom wanted ended up being an extension on the grant, a time extension on the grant. And again, I'll fall back on a lot of the learnings that we're hearing about working in COVID, that, what is this sense of urgency? Why, what's the worst thing that's going to happen if a partner asks for more time?
Well, Mary, it's what you and Carrie have presented today is a very refreshing perspective that often people on my end of the equation don't hear from funders. And so thank you for it, and keep promoting the model of what you're doing, because one, it would be good, very good for people like us who are on the front line or in the immediacy of things, but also for the foundations and other funding agencies. So thank you. It's been fascinating. So I know I crossed the line between comment and question. I apologize.
Sorry, I was muted. That's great. Thank you, Tony. I see maybe you have time for one more question, and I think it's Father Silvanus from Uganda that has his hand up.
Good.
All right. Thank you very much, Martin, for the question, and I'm very grateful for the presentations. I am asking how the foundations, the GRS Foundation, helps to connect the different peace building groups or needy refugees, refugee groups in different countries, being that we are working under the church and we are working as a faith-based group and groups. I would imagine there is a way the organization or the foundation works to connect the dioceses down the countries, different countries and continents, in building a reconciliation or fostering the good job, the good activities that are being done. I hope I'm clear. Thank you very much. I'm grateful. The presentation is so good. I like it. Thank you.
Thank you, Father. I think your question is very clear and very good. And I'm going to ask my colleague Danielle if she could answer that one.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. So the way we work usually in partnership with other organizations, okay, other faith-based organizations, is it's pretty much dictated by the given place that we go, okay? So when we go to a place, usually JRS is already present there, and we want to start a reconciliation intervention. We start by doing an assessment on the ground, okay? And that assessment is of what are the drivers of conflict there and what are also the drivers of peace. So who are those institutions, organizations, individuals who are promoting peace? And in this assessment, we really seek out faith-based actors, so including the parishes, the dioceses, actors from other faith backgrounds too. And we prioritize action with them, and where possible, we also build their capacity to do this work, okay? Yeah. And we try to work in local partnership on the ground. As an organization, we haven't actually done anything which is to bring those together at a higher level yet. We network with our own teams, but there are many organizations, and maybe Mary, and especially from the interreligious portfolio, can say something more about those organizations that connect faith-based actors who are working on peace building across countries and regions also. Thank you.
Mary, Carrie, you want to add something? And then, Father, what I was thinking, I mean, you're based in Uganda, which is where we have programs in reconciliation, so there may be a link to be established. Mary?
Yes, I'm in Uganda. I am based in Western Uganda, that's where I come from. But right now, I'm staying in the central district of Uganda, in Kampala. And yes, I am aware of the Interreligious Council of Uganda and the mission they do. And they are a totally religious group which has done a lot in the northern part of the country, which hosts the highest number of refugees in Uganda. And I like the formula that Danielle gives, and it actually puts down the message of reconciliation and the service that we are doing very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mary, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I was just going to add that GHR does support the interreligious councils. Currently, we are partners with Religions for Peace. So what the main office is doing, and then we're working with African councils of religious leaders, and they were doing capacity building with the interreligious councils. So what we really see is that the interreligious councils are a integral player in this space, and we want to make sure that they have the capacity to reach out to others, to network, to be a good partner to others. So a lot of that work has been capacity building. We have not worked with IRCU in several years. We did a small grant with them to train Catholic sisters on interreligious peace building. But we've continued to be in touch with them and see them at various meetings and things. But that's the way we've engaged. Again, trying to make sure that the field is strong, that the actors are strong, so that they feel that they can bring in other partners and work with others.
Thank you, Mary.
Okay, excuse me, maybe something different again, some contribution?
Sorry?
maybe something that is quite unique in Uganda also is the cultural leaders. The cultural leaders, we have kingdoms, we have chiefdoms, and we have tribal group leaders who could, in addition to religious support, religious leaders' work, could make a contribution. Maybe the next step, my proposal would be to engage the cultural leaders at our local levels. It's a great contribution that they can make. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Danielle, any very last word on this specific topic, given the work that we've been doing in Adjumani in the north of Uganda?
Yes, just to add, yes, thank you for that last suggestion, also to include elders and community leaders from different tribes and clans. And this is something that in fact we do. So in Uganda, we have been doing it, but in other countries as well, like in Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Burundi, South Sudan, that we build the capacity of traditional conflict resolution mechanisms to do this work of reconciliation, and also in some cases actually work more closely even in partnership with them. So yes, this is really a very, very important thing to do, and it's and one that we are trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. I think that's a very good way to end this conversation. Tony, it's back to you, right?
Right, it's back to me. It's time now. A word of thanks to Arnaud, Mary, Carrie, and Danielle. Thank you for a very stimulating hour and a half together, and I'm confident that I can speak on behalf of the members within the network. Very helpful points for us to reflect on going forward. I suspect you'll be hearing from us as we go forward as well in a variety of ways. Just two announcements before we bring this to a close. One, I know is offered graciously once again to host an informal conversation around questions that might not yet have been asked today, or new questions that emerged. We'll be sending out an invitation to that conversation, which we've scheduled for November 23rd. So next week at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for about an hour and a half. So if that would be useful for you to come back together in a more informal give and take around questions, please come. And then on going a little further, September 26th, 7th, and 8th in 2022, the Refugee and Migrant Education Network is planning to host an international conference in Rome. The Gregorian University has once again agreed to be a partner with RME in hosting and leading that conference. It certainly will be a combination of in-person and remote interactions, but we look forward to bringing together people from the network and beyond during those days in Rome next year. Once again, thank you all very much. Have a good and safe day. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Tony.